All right, good evening, everyone. This is the second to the last evening for our year 2019. We have a special guest here, Jeff Hornung. He is going to do some really neat stuff and teach us how to do a Morocco Blue Bowl.
We're doing finishing tonight.
Finishing. We're going to do some finishing.
We're doing finishing tonight.
Which is one of the techniques you can be teaching over the weekend. If you haven't signed up for it, sign up for one of the classes. We still have Saturday and Sunday open. Jeff, I'm going to let you take it over from here.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Okay, all right. Thank you for having me. First order of business, we need to take a selfie. So I hope you don't mind. All right. Everybody get in real close. On three, say cheese. 1, 2, 3. Cheese. Okay. Is there anybody here in witness protection? I do plan on putting this on social media. No? Okay. All right. That's fine. Oh, one guy? You're out of luck. Okay. Real fast. My name is Jeff Hornung. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I've been turning for a little over 7 years. I've been doing it full-time for about 4 years. I've been teaching 5, and I really, really enjoy what I'm doing. Being able to come out and demonstrate for clubs to share what I've learned is one of the best parts about this whole thing. Selling product and making money is also important, just because Daddy needs gas money and St. Louis is a long drive home. So I wanted to let you all know that if you are interested, I will have 5 Nova Comet 2 lays. Right now they're at Ron Howe's house and they are new in the box, sealed. I had them shipped over from Nova in Florida a couple of days ago. They're going to be used a grand total of 2 days at the retreat next weekend. I did not bring my trailer with me. I do not want to take them home. $500, you get a lathe, all of the normal accessories, plus a G3 chuck and a set of mini tools. Normal retail on that's about $600. I normally retail them for about $575. But like I said, I don't want to take them home. There's 5. First come, first serve, cash, credit card, PayPal, doesn't matter. Get with me at some point between now and early Sunday morning. Not this coming Sunday, but the next Sunday after the retreat if you want one. But if you want one, let me know, because at the last 2 retreats, I sold them all and I sold them early. So I think that's the only gratuitous sales pitches I need for the retreat. For this weekend, like they said, we're going to be doing the Morocco Blue, so basically it's a blue version of this with white wax in the texture. We're going to cover bowl design, holding on a recess, using texturing tools, applying dye color, applying a contrasting colored wax, and then finishing of this particular bowl. I'd like to hope that we can get at least 2 of these done in a session. We'll be here all day, Friday, Saturday, doing these. And if not, if you're at a level where you prefer to take a little more time, that's fine too. Everybody should get out of here with at least 1 finished piece. And the only thing you might need to do when you get home is apply a spray finish. I don't know if they're going to let us. Yeah, so I'll take my price tag off before you see that. All right, so that's the back. It is textured all the way on the outside, all the way on the inside. And even though it looks really complicated, it's not. If you know how to make a bowl, I can teach you how to do this. Learning how to orient the texturing tools is the hardest part of the whole process, and that's part of what we're going to do tomorrow and Saturday. On Sunday, we're going to make a Calabash Bowl. I prefer the African style over the South Pacific style, mostly because the guys that are proficient in the South Pacific style argue, and they get really fussy when you do a South African style. I don't know why, because current scientific thinking is that the Calabash Bowl actually originated in Africa, so for us to be able to use this shape and call it a calabash shouldn't be a problem. But the keys that we're going to take away with this is to make a true round bottom bowl. So I got no flats here, and we're going to turn really thin. We'll talk about wet wood versus dry wood. We're going to talk a little bit about wood movement, and if we have time to do a second piece, we'll do an embellishment bead on the outside of the surface. If we have a nice piece of wet wood and we put that bead on there, when it dries and warps, you'll get a nice flowing snake-like curve. It really makes the bowl stand out with that warping. So that's what we're doing Sunday. We'll be doing this class all day long as well. And we'll talk about the finishing when we get into that part of the demo. Yes, sir. Round bottom, thin wall. That's it. It will end slightly enclosed. Basically, it needs to resemble the bottom of a calabash gourd. And the calabash gourd is kind of a figure eight, a fat figure eight like me. Fat figure eight gourd that the prehistory humans would grow, would dry. They would cut this vessel open and use it to transport water or food or seeds or whatever they needed, a bowl to transport things. And we're making a bowl that simply resembles the bottom of this squash. Unless you're of the mindset to make the South Pacific style, in which case you need to have a proper elevated side and specific proportions. That is the Calabash Bowl. The one we're going to do is a Calabash Bowl, and that's the different, whether we argue about it or not, okay? And finishing on that is super simple, but I brought them to talk about finishing products for this. As far as questions go, I'm going to move as fast as I can so that I can cover as many topics as I can. If you have a question, get my attention. If you need to resort to throwing something, I'd prefer it to be slightly soft, but I'll try to answer your questions in real time as we go. I'm here to help you as much as I can, so having you guys ask me questions, if necessary, is good for the process. It's good for me so that I know that not everybody's sleeping, and at least I'm hopefully helping you to think. Any questions before we get going on that? No? All right. Now, I will say that I do own a wood turning supply company, the Walnut Log, based out of St. Louis, online and at events like the Trinity Rivers Retreat. I haven't come down as a vendor at SWAT because Craig and Norm carry one of the products that I import. They carry Yorkshire Grit, so when you buy that from them, you're technically buying from me. But next weekend, buy it from me first, because I want to lighten my load and get better gas mileage on the way home. But whatever I don't sell might end up here anyway. As far as tonight's demo goes, I think most of what I'll be talking about, even though I do sell some of it, I think you can also buy some of it here from Craig and Norm. Great guys. I'm glad they let me come in and let you guys use their space. Really enjoy working with them at SWAT the last couple of years that I was able to do that, and really happy to be here. So thank you for that. Let's get started. Okay. So title of this particular demo is Finishing the Finish. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about products, but first we have to talk about finishing your piece. And with that, we have to start with tool work. We've got to talk about finishing cuts, and we've got to talk about sanding. Now, I have a piece. This was from the last demo that I did on this demonstration at Turning Southern Style a couple of weeks ago. Pretend it's dull and mostly turn, because I'm going to turn away the finish like now. We're going to talk about tooling and what the best grind is, and how to use a couple of different finishing techniques with your tools, because if you don't have a good surface to apply your finish, you're not going to have a good finish. It comes down to lipstick on a pig. It's not going to make a difference if there's tear out and speed bumps and tool marks and radial scratches left. We want to try to really refine the surface of the wood first. Most of the products that we will apply to the surface will only enhance flaws in the surface. So we have to start by minimizing the flaws, and by focusing on your tool work, it will help with the rest of your cuts on the rest of your pieces. Now you're trying to up your game and really gain control over your tooling and your sharpening. So real quick, let's talk about what the best angle for sharpening is. And the simple answer is there is no best angle. I don't care who you're talking to or what product they're trying to sell you. There is no one set best. I know what I like and I know what works best for me. I can guarantee you it will not be the best for everybody in this room. Some of you might like that. Some of you might prefer a different angle, a different tool, a different grind. It doesn't matter. Learning how to use your tools, learning how to get to a point where you can reproduce your grind is way more important than the actual grind itself. It doesn't matter what the angle is as long as that angle does the job that you need it to do at the time. For me, and I can only talk about my experience, I prefer a 50-degree modified fingernail, so it's about a medium-sized wing. I have a tendency to prefer a half-inch bowl gouge. Can you go to the overhead? I have a tendency to prefer a half-inch bar, so 3/8-inch flute, medium-sized wing with a 50-degree bevel. And the way that I like to get that the most often is by using a one-way Wolverine type system. Any Wolverine style system will work in exactly the same way as any other Wolverine style system. You can do this on almost all of the commercial jig systems out there. You can reproduce this on a Tormek or all of the Tormek clones that are out there. You just need to know the right settings. The reason why I like the 50-degree is because it gives me the best balance, in my opinion, between edge retention and cutting efficiency. And I would rather spend more time using a tool and less time sharpening a tool, because I know that I'm going to sharpen the tool again before I make my finishing cuts anyway. So I don't have to have a super sharp tool or a super aggressive tool at the beginning of my project. I can use this tool, and depending on how the wood responds, probably get through an entire bowl before I need to go back and sharpen. And that's pretty much in real time up to about an 8-inch diameter bowl. Anything bigger than an 8-inch, I'm probably going to want to sharpen. For me, I've got 4, 5, 6 bars of the exact same size. So sharpening is removing one bar, putting a second bar that's fresh in, and going back to work. If you take your grind, if you prefer a 45 or a 40-degree grind on your bowl gouge, that's going a little more aggressive. The downside, and there's always a downside, the downside to having a more aggressive edge is you lose edge retention. It might not be enough to bother you and your style of turning, but it's enough to bother me, and I don't go that way on my bowl gouges. If you prefer something along the lines of a 60 or a 65-degree angle, now you're going more sharp. Again, because of the geometry of that edge, going sharper, you lose edge retention. I stick with the 50-degree for my working tools for the most part because I maintain a little more edge retention, and it doesn't give me any real expense of sharpness or aggressiveness because I've come to really enjoy this particular grind. Doesn't make it the best, it's just the best for me. The way I like to set them is I like to use angle setting jigs. This will drop into the pocket of my V-arm, and the 2 points will post up against the surface of the sharpening wheel. It will give me, this one will give me a 60-degree grind. This one will give me a 50. I normally bring my jigs with me when I travel. That way, no matter whose system I'm sharpening it on, it comes out exactly the same as it would in my own shop. The reason why I like the jigs is because I'm eliminating any variation or faceting or changes on the grind of my tool, and that goes to muscle memory. If my hands don't have to relearn how to finesse this tool every time I go back to the lathe, I'm going to be able to get more consistent cuts more often, and I will be able to advance my skill building much faster because I'm not, even if it's a microsecond or something, there's a delay, there's a change that my hands have to compensate for. If I'm traveling with my own jigs, I don't have to worry about it because the systems are almost always set up exactly the same. This is where the variation comes. It's the angle between the V pocket and the wheel and the leg of your jig in particular. This one being mine, I could weld this in place and be completely happy. I never change the angle of my jig leg. It's set at that 22.5, 23 degree angle, which is about a business card thickness below the second notch. It has my Star Wars tape on it, so I know it's my jig, and I will never change this one. I've got a second jig. If I want to do other grinds for other reasons, that one can be changed at will. This one I don't change, and I will probably weld it in place off-season so that nobody else changes it when I'm not looking. I want the consistency, and what the leg angle does is changes the pitch of the wings, okay? So if I'm looking at my tool, if I'm looking straight down the flute, I can see my wings pitched however they are on your tool. On mine, they're more upright, and the reason they're more upright is because the leg of my Wolverine jig is at a higher position. That opens the wings up. Further down that leg goes, the steeper the pitch of the wings. You look at an Ellsworth jig, that leg's way down. Makes the wings of the tool come in hard. There's a reason for that, and that's because when you change that edge geometry, now it becomes that shear cutting tool that David is really most proficient with. And you can do some really fine finishing cuts with the tool because of that angle. Flip side, and there's always a flip side, you lose a little bit of aggressiveness on the inside of your turnings if that's the only tool that you have to work with in your shop. Now, as you get to use your tools and get to know them, your speed will increase, your proficiency will obviously increase, but understanding what the different jigs and their settings do and can affect on your tool steel will help you dial in, experiment a little bit, dial back into something that you really more prefer to have, or find yourself that new best grind that really does what you need it to do. Most of the time, I'm just working with this 1/2-inch bowl gouge. Most of my finishing cuts I can accomplish with this grind. The only real difference that I do on my sharpening, can you go back to the overhead just for a minute? Just for a minute. The only extra step I take is I knock off the heel of my tool. I don't need a 3/8 inch long bevel. My skill has gotten to the point where I don't need that much metal against the wood for support purposes in my cuts. By shortening that bevel, it does a couple of things for me. It allows me to make really nice clean cuts on the inside of a bowl. When we get into the calabash, I can do a heavy undercut with a standard 50-degree bowl gouge just by knocking the heel off. My bevel is fat eighth, maybe not quite 3/16, maybe no more than 3/16, and that's all I need, and I can do a nice undercut with this one tool. I don't have to buy a specialty tool. I have them, I use them, but I don't have to buy a specialty tool in order to get that undercut. The other thing it allows me to do is have a faster cut. I can move wood faster because I'm not dealing with as long of a bevel. The chips end up clearing faster. It's a smoother transition across the wood. There's probably some friction differences. Might not make any difference where you're at. For me, my tool was getting in the way and the solution was knocking the heel off. So that's really the only modification to this, except for changing the grind to what I prefer, and everything else is stock and straight out of the tube. I can put this grind on any tool on the market, and I can do absolutely the exact same thing. Depending on the quality of the steel, I might have to sharpen more. I prefer M42 simply because it's a higher quality steel. It will hold an edge longer than M2 and some other lower quality high-speed steels. If you prefer A11 powdered metal or the titanium nitride coated tools that are coming out, they hold an edge pretty much as well as the M42. They're all about the same price range. And as far as brand goes, it doesn't matter. There is no best tool. Use what you like. I use what I like. I don't use what I don't like. You need to do the same. Don't get stuck in arguments over what's best, because you're the only one that can determine that in your own shop. All right, moving forward and talking about finishing cuts. Now that I've got a nice sharp tool, I have a lot of different options. Pretend we've turned this in real time. I've got a nice shape on the outside. Let's pretend I don't have finish on the piece, but maybe I've got some tear out. I need to get rid of that tear out. All right. What's the ticking noise? That's ticking noise. All right, let's pretend I got a little tear out, usually up in here. Along the end grain, two sides of the bowl, there's always something. I can't sand tear out away. I can cover it up. I can minimize it sometimes, but I can't sand tear out away unless it's very small, at which point I'm basically wasting wood. I can, however, cut tear out away. I can sand away tool marks. I can't sand away tear out. Best solution for tear out is to try and cut or scrape it away with a tool, if at all possible. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about a couple of different techniques to try to eliminate that tear out and get the best surface I can before I start applying finishing product. One of them is a shearing scrape. This is achieved by taking a standard bowl gouge, pick an angle, any angle. You need to drop your handle. And when I say drop your handle, I mean really drop your handle. I want the outside wing of this tool to be just a little off parallel, just a little angled off parallel from the surface of this piece. Can you go to the overhead real quick? So if this is my lower wing, I'm parallel to the wood now. I want to have a slight angle in my approach to that tool. Only way I can do that is by dropping the handle, going high on the tool rest, and bringing that tool in, very light pressure. I'm not hogging out the wood. I'm not shaping. I'm simply refining the surface. And my shavings are very fine. I'm not coming away with big, heavy shavings. I'm coming away with really fine, wispy shavings. And I'll get to a point where I can't continue that arc based on the shape of my piece and the position of the tool rest. That's okay. Turn off your machine, move your tool rest. I'm not lifting up any tear out, which is a shame. I probably should try to lift some tear out so that we can see. And I'm only running about 700 RPM too. Normally I'd be running a fair amount faster. Between centers, less than 8-inch diameter piece. I won't tell you what speed I'd run it at, but I would normally run faster, so I'm going to. A little more speed can sometimes be the difference between a good clean cut or a good clean scrape and not. If you're between centers, fudge on the speed, dial it up just a little bit, keep it comfortable. Don't go ridiculous, because that might give you an advantage in slicing or scraping those fibers cleanly. I'm changing my position. I'm now holding the tool in a way that I can reach over to the left side and come back to the right. Again, my handle's down. Again, I'm only cutting on the inside of the bottom wing. If you can picture that my cutting surface is on the inside. I'm not slicing on the outside. I'm scraping with that inside edge. And because of this geometry, I have a chance of getting these really fine shavings. I'm not moving my arms, I'm moving my body. It's standard cutting procedure. When I run out of reach, I switch my position, move my tool rest, change my tool orientation. Handle is still down, and I'm still trying to get that bottom wing perpendicular across the surface of the wood. We ought to put a trash can right there. All right, so I've dialed this piece back. I've not lifted up any torn fibers. I've not damaged the wood. I've simply removed the finishing products from the previous demo. You can see a little glow in here. I've got a nice surface. There are tool marks. Doesn't matter. I can sand tool marks. I'm not worried about little ripples of speed bumps. That's not important. I'm worried about tear out. Tear out's the enemy. I can't sand it. I need to cut it. So that's one option with a standard bowl gouge. You can do this with any grind. We can also do the David Ellsworth style Ellsworth cut. It is very effective and efficient with his grind, with those wings pitched in much steeper. The reason why it works is because you're presenting a larger slicing profile to the wood. You have a lot more control when the wings are pinched in. Cool thing is, if you're comfortable with it, you can do it with a standard bowl gouge. Again, just my standard 50 degree. Now, if you have not tried with the David Ellsworth grind, this might not, and if you're not an experienced bowl turner, this might not be the best option for you because your flute is going to be very dangerously close to that wide open 12 o'clock position that all of us instructors tell you to stay away from. Now, to do the Ellsworth grind, you kind of have to go right up to that edge. I'm going to have my flute angled toward my piece, so the flute's angled to the left. Hands of a clock, I'm right in between 11 and 12. I'm getting really close, but it could give me a really fine shaving. It could take care of a problem of tear out, and I can do it with just a standard tool. I don't have to go out and buy something else. I'm not hogging out any material. I'm not applying pressure into the piece. I'm drawing my tool across the piece. That's the trick to finishing cuts. And I simply want to get in here and roll it open that I'm on that bevel just to the point where I'm getting a cut. Where that first process was scraping, this is actually cutting. Again, technically I'm still on that bottom wing. And it's given me a really fine surface. It's eliminated some of the tool marks that I had in there from the first technique. The surface is a bit shinier. This isn't just a shadowing color. The wood is cleaner than this. I've got a higher grit finish here than I do here, and you can feel it if you came up to check it out. You can definitely feel a difference. Ellsworth grind, if you can get your hand on his DVD talking about that specific grind, that's, in my opinion, if you can't take a class with David, watching his DVD is a great way to learn that technique. I have not taken a class, but I do own his DVD, and that's how I learned the techniques. I refined them with an Ellsworth gouge, and then figured out I can do it with my standard gouge just as well. And for me, if I don't have to set one tool down and pick up another one, I'm lazy. That's an extra step. I don't want to have to do it. So I try to do all of my work with whatever the tool in my hand currently is, and there's no reason not to. So you don't have to have a million tools like I do, unless you want them, and that's okay too. Craig will tell you whatever you want. But you don't have to have them. And that's what I just want to show you. You don't need a specialty tool to do a specialty technique most of the time. Okay? All right, another option that we can talk about is scrapers. Sometimes, even with a good sharp cutting tool, no, it's half step back. One more finishing cut with a cutting tool. I have a specialty gouge. It's a 3/8 inch bar, 1/4 inch flute. It's got a much shallower grind, much shorter wings, a little bit more than traditional, still technically a fingernail, but it's short. This is sharpened at a 60-degree angle. So I'm giving up edge retention in order to gain sharpness. If my regular grind and my normal techniques don't work, I'll try either a shearing scrape or a shearing cut. Sometimes the wood is stubborn and it won't let me get a good cut at that point. I might consider going to a tool like this, that it will be good for 1 or 2 passes before I have to go back and grind. But since it's a finishing cut, I only really need 1 or 2 passes anyway. I'm not hogging out, I'm not shaping, I'm refining that surface so that when I apply product, the product will be on a pristine surface instead of something that I'm trying to cover up and mask. By going to the sharper edge, I've got a better chance of a cleaner cut. And maybe this is what I need to do in order to get some stubborn tear out removed from the surface of the wood. Again, I'm not applying a lot of pressure into the wood. I'm slicing across the wood. It's all about pressure, control, approach, speed, and a little bit of finesse. So I'm going to get in here, find my bevel, watch for the shavings to start coming off. because it's a slightly more traditional grind, there it is. I'm not putting a lot of pressure into the piece. My thumb is applying pressure onto the bar, into the tool rest, but you can see the very fine shavings coming off. There's the shavings. Very thin, very wispy, almost dust, but, oh, sorry, Ron. You might not want to sit there. You want my glass? You want my shield? All right, but again, I left a transition line here. So I've got my Ellsworth here. I've got that 60-degree gouge here, and there's a crack. So this will never be a finished piece. But this is a really good surface too. I'm not seeing or feeling any tear out, and sometimes I can't see it. Sometimes I have to feel it. I've got to feel where those weird spots, those flaws are. My eyes are crap. I fully admit that, so I don't rely on them for anything except general shape. For stuff like tear out, especially the fine stuff, I need to feel it. I need to get my hands on the piece. So I'll stop off and look. But with that 60-degree grind, it was I sharpened it at my shop right before I packed up. 1 or 2 good passes. There's a couple of tool marks. I can sand them away, but I've got a really nice surface. I cut away any tear out. There's no more tear out left at this point, so that's another option. Get yourself a specialty tool. If you're not already using that grind, small bar, it doesn't have to be something, doesn't have to be a 5/8 inch gouge for hogging out. Something little, something that you can grab real quick, sharpen, 1 or 2 passes, get a nice finish, move on. This is one of Jimmy Clue's preferred methods of getting his finishing cuts. He likes grabbing a smaller tool like this with that 60 degree in order to get the surface that he needs. Now, moving forward to scrapers. If you don't have a bunch of fancy tools and you don't want to spend the money on fancy tools, doesn't matter. If you've got a nice round nose scraper, you can do something very similar. This is kind of along the same lines as what we were trying to do with the gouge in that first shearing scrape. Normally when we're using a scraper, we are edge on center, handle slightly elevated, we're going around, we're hogging out, we're doing what we need to do. If I want to use this as a finishing tool, I want to change the angle geometry where the tool meets the surface of the wood. I'm actually going to roll this up on a 45. I will still do a shearing scrape. I will still do a scrape, it will now be a shearing scrape, just like I was doing with the bowl gouge. I don't have to have this in that one standard orientation if it's not getting rid of the problem that I'm being presented with at that time. And sometimes, if I can't cut it away, sometimes I need to scrape it away. A standard round nose scraper is a really good option. Again, I'm not applying a bunch of pressure into the wood. I'm scraping across the surface. I want really fine, refined shavings. Shavings are blowing away. Talk to Ron Howe at the end because I think he's collecting them for me. There they are. And I can just come across the surface of the wood and knock back any tear up. Angel hair ones are down there on the monitor. Check out the wood. Again, I'm not feeling any tear out. I've got a nice surface. This is a good way to get a good finishing cut, and all I did was I went from a standard orientation up to about a 45. On my heavy scrapers, I like to round over that back corner. On higher grade tools, a lot of time that's already done from the factory. If you have a lower grade tool, doesn't matter. Take it over to your grinder. Just round over that edge, or get a hand file or some 220 sandpaper or something. Round over that downward side edge and make it softer. That way you don't have a hard corner trying to catch in the surface of your tool rest. One thing I didn't mention was the surface of the tool rest itself. This needs to be taken care of and maintained and tuned up just like any other tool in your shop. If you get a bunch of nicks or burrs, or in my case, product, glue, anything that causes a blip, dimple, ripple on the surface of the tool rest is going to translate through the tool onto the surface of the wood. So if you've got a dink in the tool rest, you're going to have a dink in the surface of the wood that you'll have to deal with later. Clean off the surface of your tool rest. 220 sandpaper, just in a shoe polishing kind of motion. If it's deeper than 220 paper, will take care of a finer file, metal file to go over the surface of that. Clean and tune up the surface of your tool rest regularly. We all get catches. We all have issues. Things happen. I'm a mess with product. I use a lot of embellishing product and glues and whatnot. So I'm always cleaning my tool rest because I always get a bunch of crap on it. But on occasion, something will happen. I'll end up with a mystery dent in here somehow. I need to get that out, or that's going to end up translating to the surface of the wood, probably right when I'm trying to get a nice finish. If you're doing something with a hard corner, like on a heavy scraper, even if you round that over, that's going to drop in and catch in any of those nicks, scrapes, whatever, and that can translate to the surface of the wood, which means you're going to spend more time refining the surface that you might not have had to do if you would have just cleaned your tool rest at the beginning. I can do that exact same cut with a carbide. I've just got a standard round carbide. I'm going to do the exact same cut, rolling it up on a 45-degree angle, just a nice round carbide. Again, the corners came softened out of the factory. If you have a carbide that has sharp edges, round over that one bottom side so that you can do this. If you're working on the outside of a bowl and you're working on a faceplate or something, working on the primary curve on the outside, you can do that pulling scrape from the other direction as well. You're not limited to just one direction. If you're left-handed, if you prefer to work this way, no reason why you can't. Whichever side of that tool is down on the tool rest, soften up that edge. It'll help things. It'll keep it from digging into the tool rest. It'll keep you from getting catches and make this process a little bit more smooth. So I'm going at that 45-degree angle. I'm also at a slight angle to the surface of the wood. I'm not straight on perpendicular. Trying to change that angle, that geometry, so I can get that shearing scrape. If you look at my pinky, it's catching some of the shavings. Yeah. Yeah, it's, again, see around for the shavings if you don't believe me. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, and he will do that, just in case. All right, so might not be the best option all the time, but if having the ability to have a number of different solutions for a certain problem will give you a much greater advantage in solving that solution. If you're trying to only rely on one tool or one technique or one something, you're limiting yourself on what you can do. By being able to utilize other tools in different ways to achieve the same outcome might be the best thing that you could walk away with from this demo. And it really does help, because sometimes the wood doesn't care what you want. It doesn't care what you're trying to do. There's been times when I've had to resort to just hardcore scraping with a heavy bowl scraper on the outside of a piece because I can't cut that tear out away effectively any other way. And there's been other times when I've simply had to chuck the piece or paint it. That's kind of where I paint a lot of pieces. I'm not going to admit this in public, but some of those pieces have tear out that I couldn't get away, and instead of it being a salad bowl, it became an art piece. And that was simply due to frustration. I'm going to leave the tear out in the tool marks. I'm going to put paint on it, and nobody's going to ever know. I'm not going to lose the piece, but I can't fix this problem with what I'm trying to do. So don't always think that you're locked into something just because of the tooling that you have. There's always a different way to try a different approach. And the last tool that we're going to talk about is the negative rake scraper. This is a standard scraper that has a primary bevel, just like a regular scraper, but it also has a top bevel, opposite bevel, that reduces the cutting edge from being on the top of a metal bar, brings it down further into the body of the tool. This will give you a much sharper, much finer scraping edge, and by approaching this, the surface of the wood with this tool, I have a better chance of getting a finer scrape right off the steel. Now, the first thing I will try to do is in traditional scraping orientation, tool's flat on the tool rest, handle slightly raised. I'm just refining that surface because it's a scraping tool. I can go both directions. I have very nice little shavings flying over towards Ron. I'm getting rid of some of my tool marks. Nice surface. I can also roll this up on that 45. I can use it in that orientation as well. I'm changing my geometry, increasing the shearing angle, reducing the amount of pressure against the surface of the wood in an attempt to get the best surface possible. Not everybody has a negative rake scraper. Not everybody wants one. Not everybody needs one, and that's okay. But you can see it's doing a really fine job right up to there where I stop. I've got a nice good surface. I'm not feeling any issues or tear out. Surface of the wood has got a nice shine on it, and because I don't want to do a bunch of sanding in here, I'm going to go ahead and finish negative rake scraping the rest of the outside of this piece. Now you can purchase or make negative rake scrapers. If you're a bowl turner and you like using them on the outside, you might want to get one that is oriented to the left and one that is oriented to the right. That way you can go in either direction depending on the orientation of your piece on the lathe at the time, and that might allow you to get a really nice finish before moving into your sanding. There's a lot of other scraping type tools that you can use, more than we have time to talk about. I spent a couple of days in class with Michael Hasseluk last week, and one of the things that he prefers to use is a very large, wide diamond point scraper that he'll roll up on that 45-degree angle and get a nice shearing scrape. Beautiful little tool, not my preferred tool, and here you go. I did some shearing scraping with a negative rake scraper, and right there on top, I lifted an enormous amount of tear out. Right there, I just made it worse. And we hadn't been doing that, and that was simply because of the tool in my hand. This wood doesn't want to be scraped at that point. I need to go back, I think, to a cutting tool. So we're going back to my 60-degree. I'm going to see if I can cut this away. All right, so one cut, we've reduced it. Second cut would eliminate it. Yeah, that's not a good blank. I'm glad I'm using this for a demo. All right. The next step, if I can't get this with a traditional tool, the next step for me would be to apply a sanding sealer. All sanding sealers work about the same way. I happen to prefer and sell the Mylan's cellulose sanding sealer. Sorry. There you go. I prefer the Mylan's. I've tried them all. I keep coming back to the Mylan's, and at that point I decided I needed to start selling it as well. Good chance you can get it here. I haven't gone through their stock yet. If you've got Deft or Zinsser or General, doesn't matter. If you've got a sanding sealer, use what you got. This just happens to be the one that I prefer. Some of these sanding sealers come out of the container a little on the thick side. Mylan's for sure comes out of the container a little on the thick side. Simple solution, get an 8-ounce squirt bottle with a good heavy cap. I get these at the Art Supply, one of the Art Supply stores in St. Louis. Art Mart, Dick Blick, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, pick one. You can also find them at beauty store supply places. They sell products for hair. I don't know what hair is. I don't know what beauty products are either, obviously. The key for me on a squirt bottle is the quality of the cap. This one's got a really nice large size cap. It doesn't break after repeated use, unlike these little red guys that have a tendency to split. That one hasn't split yet, but that's the typical red cap. There's the cap on the sanding sealer that I'm currently using. There's the difference. Good cap makes for a good seal. Probably won't split on you. And with the Mylans especially, mix it 50-50 with its preferred thinner. It's a lacquer-based product. Use a lacquer thinner. Some of the sanding sealers are water-based. Use water. I don't know what all of the thinning products for all of the sanding sealers out there are. It should tell you what the base product is or what it can be thinned with. The Mylan's lacquer-based, so thin with lacquer thinner, 50-50. You can, a rough estimate. It doesn't have to be rocket science. Yes, sir. I don't what? Yeah, when I'm in this position, it's a scrape. Right, exactly. This is a scrape. Yeah, this one's called a shearing scrape. This one is the name of this. Yeah. Not when I'm in the middle of a demo, and no, actually I don't. I don't hone. Yeah, and I've already used my sharp tool a couple of times. I lost the edge. I don't want to take time to go to a grinder. I would probably go and grind.
David Ellsworth says that if the grinder stops running before you go back to it, you're not sharpening off.
I'm not David Ellsworth, and there's lots of reasons. And I would argue with some of that. Modern steels. No, actually, I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to argue. I'm not a honer. A lot of people hone. I'm not one of them. I will never tell you not to hone. For me, it's an extra step that I've got other solutions to work around, and for time saving in my own shop, I don't worry about it. Honing is not as important, and you're probably coming from a level of experience that I'm never going to have simply because of the time that you've spent within the woodworking community. I've been doing this a total of 7 years, and I've learned from that point. So for me, on high-speed steel specifically, I don't find an advantage to honing. If I was in my own shop, I would have stuck with this tool. I would have already cut that out. For the sake of a demo, I'm going to specialty tools and showing you a bunch of other options. But by leaving the tear out, I now get to talk about sanding sealers. So just an object lesson. Yeah, not a big deal. Some people find honing to be advantageous. I'm not one of those people, but that doesn't mean I'm right. It just means I don't do it. So that I would do. This tool, for me, I personally don't find a benefit, but that's just my opinion. But like I said, by leaving that tear out, I get to talk about sanding sealer, and moving forward, thin at 50-50. This product is designed to stabilize the surface of the wood, to stabilize the fibers at the surface. If I've got a bunch of torn out fibers, if I can't cut them or sand them, it might be because I need to stabilize them. I can use a sanding sealer to apply a little bit of product to the surface of the wood and stabilize them. They're going to be locked into place. I'll have a better chance of making a clean cut or a clean scrape simply by doing that. And because I didn't have any lacquer thinner in my shop before I left, I didn't mix up a new batch of sanding sealer, so I can't seal the whole thing, I don't think. But I would just apply some product here. No big deal, not rocket science. I'd apply it to the entire surface of the wood, and I'm going to show you why by letting it dry real quick just in this little blotchy area. If I don't apply it to the entire surface at the same time, I'm going to end up with other blotches. I will not have a nice smooth surface. I won't be able to get a good even penetration, and as you look at it, especially with a critical eye, you're going to see variations in the surface as far as the color is concerned, simply because I didn't apply sanding sealer to the entire surface all at the same time. You do it to a little area, do it to the entire piece. The big reason, aside from stabilizing the fibers on the surface, is you're locking in your finished color. Whatever product I apply to this first is going to tone the color to what it's going to be for the rest of its natural existence until it gets to the point where it will start to darken all by itself just due to age and the fact that it's wood. So hopefully I'm going to be able to get this whole thing sealed before having to go to the thick stuff. And the primary reason why I thin it is because it will apply easier. It'll go on faster. It will dry faster. Might not be enough to make a difference to you, but I find it a lot easier to work with when it's thinned. All right, so pretend I applied 2 coats. There, you can see the color variation from the first application to the second application. I've got right there. I created a stain by not covering this quickly with the first application. First application of a sanding sealer needs to be 100%. It needs to be fast. Second application doesn't have to be as fast because I've already changed the color of the surface of the wood. Now I have a better idea of what it's going to look like tone-wise when it's finished because I've applied a product. Sir? Question is how many coats. If I thin it, I prefer to apply 2 coats. Straight out of the, and your mileage may vary. Different products, it depends on drying time, application process. The Mylan's thin, 2 quick coats, and that's all I need. It'll be flash dry in about 15-20 seconds, ready to go with the next step. You can also get sanding sealers in aerosol form. If you don't like messing with that, or if you've got a piece with lots of voids or a burl, or you're working with a burl cap, or a natural bark edge, or something that you don't want to try to rub over with a paper towel, you can get sanding sealers in aerosol. Bellins, Masters, there's a couple other ones out there. This will allow you to get that sanding sealer on there without a bunch of paper towel mess left over that you've got to try and pick out later. All right, at this point, I can go back, sharpen my tool, take another finishing cut. That might take care of my problem. In an effort to save some time, we're going to pretend that I've done that and I've got a really nice pristine surface. This lower area here does not have any tear out, so we're going to focus on that next. The next possible step in finishing is going to be sanding. I've applied a sanding sealer to deal with a problem. I can go ahead and sand. If I don't have a problem, I would not have applied the sanding sealer at this point. I'd wait. All right? I'd go ahead and I'd sand. And I'd start with a lower, heavier grit, and that lower, heavier grit I encourage you to think of as an actual turning tool. When people joke about the 80 grit gouge, kind of take that to heart and consider it an 80 grit gouge. You need to use that grit to get rid of your tool marks, any dipsy doodles, any other mechanical flaws on the wood. Refine that surface. That's the grit that you want to spend the most time with. That's the grit that you want to use as much paper as you need to. The higher you climb through the grits, the less time you spend with each grit, and the less paper you should effectively need to use because you're refining the previous surface left by that previous grit. So if I'm building a shopping list for the year, I'm probably going to buy more 80 and 120 grit than I am 180, 220, 300, 400, 600, whatever. I'm not going to spend as much, I'm not going to use as much of the finer grits, because if I've done this right, I shouldn't really need as much. And the finer the grit, the higher I go up in the grit, the less pressure I want to apply on the surface of the wood. I'm simply refining the previous surface. It's dialed in, it's sanded. That's what I did with that 80 and that 120. So when I want to go to 180, I'm using less paper, I'm spending less time. Speed on your sanding, keep it on the lower side. You can generate a lot of heat sanding. If your fingers start getting hot, you're either sanding too quickly or applying too much pressure, or both. Back off your speed. I like to sand somewhere between 550 and 700, depending on the size of the piece, and I'll adjust if my fingers start getting uncomfortable. I can sand at a higher level, but I run the risk of actually burnishing the surface. If I burnish the surface, if I get really glossy streaks on the surface of the wood, the next higher grit is probably not going to be able to deal with that properly. I'd actually have to go back to that heavier grit, sand away the burnish marks, and then continue. I also run the risk of introducing microcracks to the surface of the wood, which might not show up until the very last buffing stages. And at that point, you've spent a lot of time and effort to get a really nice finish just to find out that there's something still on the surface of the wood that is now making itself known. So keep your sanding speed down. I'm not a big fan of hand sanding. You tend to leave more radial scratches, and at that point, you'd need to turn off your machine, sand with the grain, or sand opposite of those radial scratches, however they're presenting themselves on the wood, in order to get rid of them before moving on to that next grit. To eliminate that, or at least reduce it, a power sanding option of some sort. This is the next step from hand sanding. It is an analog sander, so the head rotates, little sanding pad is velcroed on there. You can make these, you can buy these, lots of different plans out there, lots of different products out there. In my opinion, on a bowl especially, this is better than hand sanding, because as the piece is going around and your body's moving back and forth, the sandpaper is also rotating as well. Now, what I prefer to do in my own shop is to truly power sand. I prefer a close quarters grill, so a 90-degree drill with a Velcro sanding pad on it, and I'll just run through my grits, climb through the grits with that. If you have a machine that will run in reverse, this is a good time to use that reverse, is when you're sanding. Back to this tear out. Wood is made up of a bunch of fibers. I tell my students it's soda straws. So if you imagine the soda straws, they're running through the wood this way. Here, where my tear out is, that's the end of those soda straws. And while I might be able to cut them cleanly, I might not be able to sand them cleanly if I'm only running in one direction. I will be sanding some off, but I'm also running the risk of laying some of those broken straws back down. If I hit my machine and let it run in reverse, I have the chance of knocking back those broken fibers and getting a cleaner surface. So I really do try to always sand both in forward and reverse, about equal time for every grit as I proceed upwards. And until I get to the finer grits, at that point it's more comfortable for me to run in reverse because I'm sanding on the top. Machine's turning up and over away from me. I'm sanding up here when it's running in reverse. It's more comfortable, and I'm in the final stage of refining the surface because that's what I need to accept my finishing products. The next step after sanding would be to apply another coat of sanding sealer. If you've already done it because you're dealing with a problem and you've turned it away, you've sanded it now, apply another coat. If I'm doing a surface finish, like a friction polish or a wax or a lacquer or a poly, I want to have the wood sealed before I apply the first coat of that product, because if I don't, the wood is actually going to absorb part of that first coat of the product, and you could end up with a blotchy surface of your wood, back to the color change, simply because you didn't seal it properly before applying the friction or surface film finishes. So moving strictly into paste waxes, friction polishes, wipe-on polys, water locks, lacquers, wipe-on lacquers, spray lacquers, all of that stuff. I need to have a sealed surface to get a good buildup of the finishing products. This is also going to give me a base layer of material that will refract the light. Every layer of product I apply to the surface will bend the light. So if I've got 2 layers of different products, both of those layers are going to bend the light in a slightly different manner. And the more layers I have, the more refraction layers I have, the more it's going to look like it's glowing. This is where that chatoyance comes from. That when you look at a piece of wood, especially something with a stunning grain, and it looks like you can just fall into it, it's because it's got a built-up layer of surface product that's bending the light in different directions. Okay? Start with the sanding sealer. It's compatible with almost everything, and it will give you not only your base color, like I said before, it'll seal the surface of the wood for your surface film finishes, but it will also give you that starting layer of light refraction. Any questions on the sanding sealer? No? Good. All right. So moving forward from there, after that, I can apply a paste wax. Craig sells Hampshire Sheen products. I do as well. The Hampshire Sheen High Gloss is it's a solvent-based carnauba wax. It has a very high carnauba wax content, and it is a great way to build up a really fast, true high gloss finish with a wax product. Downside, there's always a downside, is what you gain in ease of application and repeatability, you lose in durability. A wax finish, at the end of the day, is still a wax finish. It's not going to be as durable as a Waterlox, multiple layers of lacquer, poly, things of that nature. It's a wax. If this is something that's going into a high-use environment, might not be the best choice because it's a wax. If you need something that's quick and easy and repeatable, that's where I like to start. I like to start with a nice paste wax. Application, paper towel, apply a thin coat to the surface while the machine is off. Turn your machine on, give it a quick buff, make sure you've got a light overhead so that you can actually see the reflection of the light bulb on your piece. Whenever you're finishing, you need a light right somewhere that you can see the reflection of the light on your piece. When you apply the product, reflection is going to be wide and blurry. Turn on your machine and buff it. Wax is going to melt, it's going to flow, it's going to smooth, and then that reflection is going to get really sharp. As soon as the reflection gets sharp, when you're working with a wax product, stop buffing. You're done. You've finished that coat. And on a product like this, a true paste wax, you don't necessarily need another coat. It's kind of a one and done. The more you buff it, the more you work it, the more you lift all of that wax right back off the surface. When I've had people calling me and fussing about their paste wax finishes after seeing me work it in a demo, I ask them what their process is. They usually say they buff and they buff and they buff, and they never get a good finish. Well, the problem is they buffed and they buffed and they buffed, and they lifted all of that wax right back off. It's on their paper towel. It's not on the piece. Have a light where you can see it. As soon as that reflection gets sharp, stop buffing. You're done. And it should be just a minute or two at a moderate speed. On a wax finish, that's all you need. On a friction polish, kind of the same thing. We're back to our sanding sealer surface. It's all sanded. It's ready to go. Turn off my machine. On a friction polish, this is a shellac-based product. Most of the friction polish type, true friction polishes are shellac-based. Shellac, denatured alcohol, maybe something else, but that's pretty much the basic recipe for a friction polish product. This is a high build. I want to have several layers, but every layer I need to pay attention. I don't want to overwork. And some of you, if you've worked with friction polishes before, you know what happens with the paper towel. So we're going to go through the process. I've got my sanding sealer because the wood's already finished and ready to go. Turn off my machine. I'm going to apply that first coat with the machine off. I want to have a nice, thin coat. Thin coat. Less is more. Thin coat of the friction polish on the surface of the wood. Turn my machine on. Put a little more friction polish on my paper towel. take a couple of buffing passes. Again, I've got my light here. I'm watching that reflection, which is wide and blurry. As soon as it becomes tight and sharp, stop buffing. You've just finished that step. Let it cool. It's friction polish. Let it cool. It needs to cool and cure, okay? You've buffed it sharp. Let it cool and cure for 15, 20 seconds. The machine's going round and round. It'll cool down pretty fast. A little more product on your paper towel. Third coat. Watch the sharpness reflection. As soon as it's sharp, tight, you're done. Let it cool. Keep repeating that process. Build up 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, however many layers you want to have. The higher the layer count, in theory, the higher the sharpness or the gloss potential. Downside, there's always a downside, with friction polish is it gets really grabby when it's being overworked. And when I'm working, if you're working with a paper towel as your applicator especially, if you overwork it, you're going to heat set the product that's in the paper towel itself, and that product and the paper towel will bond itself to the surface of the wood, and you won't see it until you turn off the machine and you're inspecting your piece. There's this big wad of paper towel stuck right in the middle of this beautiful finish. And the only solution is to sand it off, turn it off, whatever, and start all over again. And that's simply because you overworked it. Friction polish, it's very simple. It does take a little bit of attention and finesse. You need to work fast when you're buffing your pieces, and that's why I like to have that light reflecting down over the surface. If you go into, let's jump to a lacquer finish. Got a can of Mylan's melamine lacquer. This is a neat little wipe-on, brush-on lacquer product. It is moderate gloss. I would not say high gloss. And with lacquer, you need patience. I can use this as a friction polish. I can get a nice built-up surface in exactly the same way as I did with the friction polish. Apply a light coat, apply a second coat, buff the two coats together, let it cure for a couple of minutes, keep building up. I'll get a semi-gloss to light gloss finish. It'll be lacquer, so it will be more durable, but it will not be that glass-like finish. And I fully admit I'm not the best at glass-like finish, but that one, you really need to have an enormous amount of patience. Apply a coat, let it cure overnight. Come back the next day, denib with a 4O steel wool or ultra-high grit sandpaper. Wipe off any excess dust with a tack cloth. Apply your second coat of lacquer. Let it cure overnight. Wash, rinse, repeat. It's a very slow process, but if the piece that you've turned justifies the amount of time it requires to get that high gloss, glass-like finish, spend the time because it will be worth it in the end. Unfortunately, to get a good lacquer finish, there's not a lot of shortcuts that I know. And if you have any shortcuts, let me know after we're done because I'm not very good at it. I just know that Pete Markin does Dizzy Bowls, and his lacquer finishes are just mind-boggling, and it takes him a week to build up that finish. Well, he uses wipe-on poly. Exactly the same process with the wipe-on poly. I can use this again as a friction type finish, exactly the same way as we did with the friction polish or with the semi-gloss on the lacquer. I can do this as a friction finish. Again, it's only still going to be that semi-gloss. If I want the high glassy finish, apply a layer, let it cure overnight, denib, clean it off, apply another coat, work it for 4, 5, 7, however many days to get however many layers. You need to be in a very clean environment. You need to be patient. You sometimes need to let it start to cure with the machine rolling at a very low RPM or on a barbecue spit thing. You know, the slow rotation in order for it to cure and settle out smoothly and naturally. Machine power is good for that. But patience truly is the key for these high gloss, glass-like finishes. How much? 15. All right, yeah. We can cover the rest in 15. All right, water locks. It's exactly the same as lacquer, except it takes even more time. This is a very slow drying product. Again, I simply don't have the patience. I've done it. It's been very impressive. I don't want to have to do it again. And that's kind of the reason why I do a lot of painting, is I don't have to do these finishes. Similar technique to the wipe on lacquer and that wipe on poly. The higher the shine, the higher the quality of the finish, the more time you need to spend working on it. Now, quickly jumping to food grade finishes. The myth of the food grade finish. What is food safe? Well, Mahoney's oil is. Paste wax is. Friction polish is. Lacquer, poly, CA, beeswax, mineral oil, they're all food safe. But there's a caveat. The question you need to ask yourself, especially if you're doing something where you're selling finished turnings to the general public for them to possibly use as a food vessel. Is it safe straight out of the can, or does it need that 30-day curing time or up to 30-day curing time for any metallic dryers or solvents to evaporate? That's the difference between what I would consider food safe and not food safe. Is it safe out of the package, or does it have to cure for a really unspecified but generally accepted amount of time, and that time's about 30 days. And for me, as somebody who's been in general retail for a long time, in order to avoid lawsuits, if I'm doing something for food use, I'm going to use a product that's safe out of the bottle immediately for food use. Doesn't mean these others aren't, it just means I don't want to get sued, and if I use something that is proven safe out of the bottle, they can't come back to me. So the mineral oil, the various polymerized walnut oils, beeswax, different combinations of those, safe straight out of the can. Yes, sir. Oh, this is Mahoney's utility finish. It's a polymerized walnut oil-based product. If we get into the allergy discussion, I'm not a doctor or a scientist or an attorney, so I can't advise you on this. I do tell people what I use on my finishes. As somebody that does suffer from an enormous amount of different allergies, I understand the process. The people that are allergic to a protein that is in the oil. On a processed product like this, it's been polymerized or heat treated, so that protein has first been filtered and then it's been baked off. Again, I'm not a doctor. I will not tell somebody to dump this down the throat of a child that has nut allergies. I can't make that call. It's not for me. But as somebody that does understand allergies, I know that that's relatively safe, and products like that are relatively safe. Mineral oil, as far as I know, nobody has an allergic reaction to mineral oil. The downside to food safe, straight out of the bottle, is you're not going to get a gloss finish no matter what you do. It's a penetrating oil. You do not use a sanding sealer. You apply several coats to the wood. You apply a coat, you let it soak in, wipe off the excess. Do it again and again until the wood stops absorbing the product. If the wood stops absorbing, wipe off the excess, let it cure. I highly recommend getting a pad of paper towel, letting it sit on that pad of paper towel while it cures, while it sits and dries. It needs to dry. It needs to stop leaching out. If you've got a fancy lace tablecloth on your dining room table, maybe don't put this on that table. Don't ask my wife why I know this, but always make sure you put a pad, a paper towel, under something that you've used a penetrating oil finish on, because it might leach out onto the surface of whatever it's sitting on. Just Jeff's pro tip of the night, watch yourself with that. If I'm doing a food grade vessel with a penetrating oil and I'm doing it for sale, I'm probably going to hit it with a beeswax block finish. I can buff it on, I can do it on the lathe, and I only do that, I do that for a little extra durability, but mostly I do it because it's going to give me a fast shine. The shine will not last because it's beeswax and beeswax is soft, but it will give me a little more shine, which might encourage somebody to purchase that piece. Just a marketing trick. Lastly, buffing systems. If you've used a wax product already, if you've used a paste wax, don't take it to a buffer because you're just going to buff the wax away. You'll end up adding another coat of wax, but you just spent time doing a step that you removed and did a whole other step. Normally when you buy these, they come with 3 mops or 3 puffs. They come with a Triple E compound, a white diamond compound, and a carnauba wax compound. If you're doing something, if you're like me and you like the abrasive paste materials, you can eliminate that Triple E bar and go straight to the white diamond. Really super simple to use. The mops are normally marked as to what product they should be associated with. So this is my Triple E wheel. Mine comes on a number 2 Morse taper arbor, goes into the headstock. I've got a drawbar that goes through, holds the whole thing in. 1750 RPM or 1725 RPM. Put a little bit of product on here. Less is more. Work the outside, the inside of your piece. You can also get tight-fisted mops that are made to use on the inside of a bowl. It gives you a little more flexibility with your system. One thing I do want to warn you about is you need to watch the amount of pressure you use when you push that piece of wood against the buffing wheel, because the buffing wheel can get to a point where it grabs it. It usually does that when you're using the wax wheel. I don't think I've lost one on the Triple E or the white diamond yet. I have researched the wax wheel thoroughly, and every once in a while you'll overbuff, you're tired, it's the last pass on the last piece, you'll lean in, the wheel will grab it, it'll stick, and it'll shoot out from under your hands, and it either hits the bed and shoots that way, or it just flies up and punches into the ceiling. I've done both. Don't do it. Unless you went to public school and you're good with bad words, because you'll say several. Watch your pressure. With everything, watch your pressure. Less is more. Ease up. I think that really covers most of what I wanted to talk about tonight as far as finishing the finish. Try really hard to get the surface of the wood dialed in first. That's where your skill is going to give you the biggest advantage. Minimize the pressure on your cuts, refine your sanding, and then use the products as they're intended. Oh, 2 other things. There is no cyanide in CA glue. Cyanoacrylate glue does not contain cyanide. The odor that you're smelling is just an odor. I don't know what is in there. I know it's not cyanide. It's not going to kill you unless you're allergic to whatever's in there, and that's a totally different story. The other thing is Danish oil. Danish oil, Danish oil. There are very few Danish oils sold in America that are actually Danish oil. And the reason is because Danish oil is a generic term that has been around for centuries. Nobody really knows what Danish oil is. It's not one recipe. The books say it should be an oil and a solvent. If you read the ingredients on Watco Danish oil, there is no oil. It's a varnish. So the Watco Danish oil has no oil, therefore it can't be a Danish oil, but that's the name on the label, and that's how they sell it. And a lot of us use it, and if you understand that it's not actually a Danish oil, it might work better for you. It's an in-between. It's in-between penetrating and finishing. You need a couple of layers, and you can get a nice shine, but you have to let it cure in between. So work with the products that you have. Also, if the bottle says finish, tongue oil finish, something finish, it's probably not what the label says it is. Formby's tongue oil finish has no tongue oil in it. I don't know why, it simply doesn't. And I've researched this a lot. Some of the ones that say finish do have the products that they say on the label. A lot of them do not. Read the labels just like you do if you're on like I'm supposed to do, since I'm supposed to be on a diet. Read the product labels, know what's in the stuff before you use it, and that will allow you to understand how to apply them in the best way possible. All right? Any questions? Yes, sir. Oh, catalyst. That's an entire lesson all by itself, and I'm not the expert for that information. He was asking about catalyzed finishings, and I know there's a varnish and a lacquer where you're actually adding something to kick over the curing. I have no experience in that and can't speak to the, covering the basic stuff you can buy at the hardware store. All right. Any other questions? No? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate you having me out here. I brought the rain. I brought the rain. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.